In this resource, we're going to learn the basics of Krita, including creating new files, using workspaces, and digital drawing. Together, we'll go through a variety of methods and approaches to sketching, inking, coloring, shading, blending, as we learn about Krita's tools, layers, and brushes. So let's open Krita on whatever device you're using. Please be sure you've reviewed the resource on how to install and set up Krita before starting this one. There's a lot of details and specific settings you'll need in there depending on what hardware you're using, whether you're using a mouse, a tablet, or an iPad. Once Krita has launched, you can go ahead and click New Image over here on the left to open up this panel. From here, you can choose from a variety of predefined sizes, change your canvas orientation, as well as set the width, the height, and the resolution of your animation. Depending on what computer you use, you might want to set the resolution and the width and the height a little bit lower. For instance, I normally use, just to play around with, I might use something like 2000 by 2000 at 150 dots per inch. The only reason you need to use 300 is if you're going to print, and if you want to make animations for a monitor or online use, you can use 72 as the resolution. You can adjust this number as needed. If you start drawing and notice that your drawings are really pixelated and bitmappy, then come back here and change the resolution on your next document. The other thing I'll say is in here under Model for Color, there's an option for CMYK. If you're going to use print, again, I would set the resolution to 300 and change the color model to CMYK instead. From here, you can head into Content and you can name this file. You can call it Week 1, for instance. How many layers do you want to start with? And you can set the background color right here too. And when you're ready, we'll click Create. Before we get started, there's a few things I want to change, including set a workspace. Let's all set the same workspace so we're looking at the same screen. For instance, I could choose the default workspace, but I actually like using Big Paint workspace. So let's go ahead and click that one. And when we close the workspace window by clicking out of it, you'll see we have some panels over here on the right called Dockers. Up here on the top are some settings, and over here on the left are our tools. And in the middle is this giant space we're going to draw on. You can add Dockers at any point by going to Setting and going to Dockers and choosing from a variety of possible Dockers that you can put on your screen to help you out. One Docker I found very useful when using a tablet or an iPad was the Touch Docker. This Docker, for me, sort of showed up hidden down here, so I'm going to have to drag it out and sort of resize it for some reason. It shows up as really small here. There it is. And the Touch Docker, what it does is it gives you some buttons here. So when you're on your tablet, you can quickly undo or change the brush size and different sorts of things like that. So there's lots of helpful Dockers in there if you want to check them out. To get started though, I'm going to rearrange my Dockers a little bit. I'm going to use the brush presets a lot. So I'm going to grab brush presets and bring that way out here. I'm going to get rid of a few Dockers, including this one over here for a specific color selector. I don't need that. I'm going to get rid of compositions as well. We can grab it right here and bring it out. Also going to get rid of undo history for now. So what I'm left with is the advanced color selector, layers, tool options, and brush presets. I'm going to snap in here. And in order to get the windows to fit the way I want, you sort of have to drag them around. If you put a window on another window, it'll become a tab. And I want this one below this, but I want my brush menu to take up that full space to the left there. So I kind of have to move the Dockers around until they're right where I want them. And this is what I'm looking for. So I can create a big brush panel and then my settings over to the right. And this is the interface I like. And when I'm done, I'm going to create my own workspace by coming in here and calling this Darren and hitting save. And now anytime I click a different workspace and go back to my workspace, it's exactly how I set it up. I'm going to add some new brushes to the library by heading to Settings and Manage Resource Libraries and click on Krita 3 Default and hit Activate. I've already had mine activated, so mine says deactivate, but if you activate yours, when you come back over to your brushes, and you might have to restart your program right now, but if you come back over to your brushes, and we'll expand this menu over here, you'll see some drop downs, and if you show all the brushes, These are all the available brushes that you have to you in this program. You can also create your own brushes as well as import brushes from other programs, and there's lots of videos online to show you how to do that. One side effect of importing these brushes is that it creates duplicate workspaces because Krita 3 had different workspaces too. So if you notice you have duplicate workspaces now, you can select one of them. A small vector were to show up twice, for instance, I could select a small vector and then heat the garbage can right here to make it go away. So that's how you can get rid of duplicate workspaces now. But for now, let's just head back to our own workspace or use Big Paint by default. One of the major panels we're going to be using is the layers panel, and you can think of a layer like a cell of animation. We'll talk about this later on in the semester. But for right now, I did ask Krita to load 2 layers. It creates a background that's full of white and it's locked, notice, so I can't edit it. And then if I come over to the paint layer 1, this is a paint layer that's empty and it's currently unlocked. So I can double click this layer and I'm going to name this layer Practice. If you're new to digital drawing, one thing that's confusing at first is when you accidentally draw on the wrong layer. So locking layers is a way to make it so you can't draw on them. So when you're not working on a layer, keep it unlocked when you're working on it and lock it if you're not going to work on it. Otherwise, you might accidentally spend hours drawing on the layer you didn't mean to. So let's head over and to the tool menu. Let's go ahead and grab a brush, for instance, and I'm going to choose black over here on my color picker. And I'm just going to draw some lines to see what happens depending on what brush I have. And I'm just going to try different brushes. I'm going to try selecting different colors. Okay, and just try different things. I'm using a pen, of course, my drawing tablet. That's why it looks really smooth. If I grab my mouse here, you notice my drawing is quite different. It's a little bit shaky. Some things that will help you out, whether you're using a brush or a tablet, are the tool options for the brush. You notice there's a smoothing option. And there's 2 options I like. I often use weighted quite a bit, and weighted just makes those mouse lines just slightly smoother. What it does is it keeps the pen tip slightly behind your cursor, so it sort of watches where you're drawing and then it sort of predicts what the average is. Now if you go to stabilizer, it does that way more, and it's really obvious when you draw the lag that's behind your mouse. But look, with my mouse I'm getting really smooth lines. That would be really hard to get, for instance, if I set this to none. These lines are much shakier than the other ones. So there is some smoothing and stabilizers over here you can practice with depending on what device you're using. To clear the canvas, I'm just going to select the layer I want to delete and hit the delete key. One thing you're going to want to know how to do right away as well is change the brush size. So you notice I can have a wide brush, or I can change the size right here to a smaller brush. And I can even type in the number. For instance, 20 is a common brush size that I use when sketching. You can also change the brush size by holding down Shift and dragging to the right or to the left. Some brushes have opacity, some have tilt, some have pressure, some have width. There's all sorts of various settings in here. Some are smudgers, there's a few erasers in here, there's charcoal pencils, all sorts of stuff. So as you're going through, a tip I found helpful early on is if you want to remember a brush, let's say I've got this brush called Basic Circle selected. I don't even know what it does. I'm going to right click it and say Assign to Tag and put it into My Favorites. Or you can create a new tag, again with like your name on it or something like that. And when you put these in here, it creates a category or adds them to My Favorites. So when I select My Favorites, all my favorite brushes show up and not the millions that are available. I know which brushes I use for sketching or painting or coloring or blending, and I have them all right here so they're fast. And if I want a new one, I can always go back and look for instance, a paint brush, or for instance, an ink brush would help. So if I go back to My Favorites, for instance, and I'm going to choose a pencil. I like drawing with a pencil. Pencil texture I like for line drawing, and pencil tilted I like for coloring. So when I'm using my pencil with my pen straight up and down, I get a sharp pencil. When I lay it down on the side, it lays down and it follows tilt. So I can do quite a bit of, if I press lightly with my pen, I can do some shading and some drawing just like a pencil. Okay, this is a challenge for the mouse, but there's solutions that will help out. When I draw with a mouse, I don't have the luxury of all the lightness and the shading and sorts of things. It just comes out like someone's pushing really hard on a pencil. So instead what I might do is knock the opacity down to like 20%, and then you can create a much sketchier looking line. And then if you go ahead and don't forget to turn that smoothing on, now you're talking. Look at that. Look how much better that was versus that one, drawing both with a mouse. Okay, so here's your sketch quality right here if you want to sketch with a mouse. The other option you have is to grab a shape tool and just draw the shape. Okay, and if you hold down Shift, it forces it to be equally wide and high. While Krita does have its handful of erasers, you can select B for the brush, and you can go over here. You see I have a kneaded eraser for charcoal going on, and as soon as I use it, it's pressure sensitive with my tablet. If I push down harder, I get a full erase. Okay, so it is nice to erase, but I prefer using erase mode, for instance. So when I go to select any brush, let's say I'm drawing with the airbrush, for instance, and I come in here and I'm just drawing and sketching and I'm not sure, and I'm like, oh, there's my line right there, and I want to quickly erase. Instead of coming over to select the tool, I'll just hit E. And watch the icon up here on the top. I hit E, and that icon turns on. And what it allows me to do is it turns my current brush into an eraser. So very quickly, I can just sit here and I can erase, hit E, brush, E, erase, E, brush, E, erase. And I can very quickly get and find the line that I want. And this is sort of, for me, is really helpful when sketching, is to look for that line and not just make like a messy sketch quickly, is to look for the lines that are the most accurate. Same thing with a mouse. You can still get that. If E is off, you can still draw. Again, it's a little harder, but you can grab that. You can even make lines tapered by erasing the ends so they look more hand-drawn with a mouse. That's a neat little trick too. Okay, so just different tricks. If you ever find yourself trying to draw and nothing is showing up, just be aware that you might have the eraser mode on, and it does work for any tool. So even if I select the square tool here and draw a square, it's set in eraser mode, so it just erased the ink right there. Now that I have a good idea of how to draw, and I've picked some brushes that I want, and I've practiced using colors and things, and I'm getting sort of comfortable, I'm going to go ahead and hide this layer by clicking the little eyeball icon over here. I'm also going to lock it to make sure I can't draw on it later on. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. And I'm going to double click this and call this layer Sketch. And for this part, I'm going to grab the brush, and I'm going to just get a brush that I like. Oh, I'm in eraser mode. I'm going to get the brush that I like. I'll get a smooth brush here, or maybe a pencil. And I'll get the width of brush I like by using Shift and dragging to the right or to the left. Okay, and I'll just kind of get the idea here. And let's draw a rough sketch of something, like for instance, just a smiley face, for instance. If it's difficult to draw, don't forget to check your smoothing out. When you're making like little eyeballs, because there's lag in that stabilizer, it might feel like your brush is drawing incorrectly. So just be sure it's set back to basic or none if it's not drawing correctly. As for moving around in Krita, now that we've drawn something here, there's a variety of ways to zoom and pan and rotate and move things around so you can work on them easier. One easy way to zoom is to scroll if you have a mouse wheel, you can just scroll in and out. You can also use the minus and plus keys, or you can use 1 to make the canvas 100%, 2 to make the canvas fit to the height of the window, or 3 to make the canvas fit to the width of the window. And at any point in time, you can come down here to the bottom right and also adjust the zoom as well. So I'm going to hit 2 to put my canvas at 100% height. I'm also going to come over here and grab the hand tool, and this is the tool we're going to use to pan the canvas back and forth to move it around. No matter what tool you have selected, even if you're using the brush tool or you select B, if you hold down the space bar, that makes the hand tool come up a lot quicker. And if you're using a pen, sometimes rotating the canvas can be helpful on a pen or an iPad. To do this, you can select 4 to rotate the canvas 15 degrees counterclockwise, 6 to rotate the canvas 15 degrees clockwise, or 5 to center the canvas. If you hold down Shift and spacebar and drag, you can freely rotate the canvas that way a lot faster. And again, hit 5 to straighten the canvas. So I want to zoom in on my smiley face now to be able to ink over the rough draft layer. So I'm going to scroll in or zoom in, hold down the spacebar and center, and zoom out a little bit so I can have that take up most of the screen here. I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer called Ink. And this time I'm going to grab what I call Ink Brush 25 is my favorite inking brush. And with my mouse, I'm going to put a stabilizer on, probably the stabilizer this time. And I'm going to just slowly draw a very crooked line with my mouse. So I can hit Control Z and I can try that again. Alright, that's not too bad for demonstration purposes. Alright, if I select this to basic, I can go back now. I can add in the eye, and I can also add in the mouth. And if you want a smoother mouth, put that stabilizer back on and drag that with your mouse. And just so you can see the difference, I'm going to select the Move tool, which looks like this little plus right here. And I'm going to slide this face over. And now I'm going to come back with my pen on the same canvas. And I'm going to draw the same thing. I'm going to put my stabilizer on weighted. I'm smoothing on weighted. I'll just draw with a pen now. And I'm going to put smoothing on basic and create the eyes. And if you select the Move tool again, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And you can see that I have both faces now. And I can use the rough sketch to draw a couple times if I want. So it's kind of like a reference. To add color, I'm going to create another new layer for color. And I'm going to rename it Color. And one way I can color is just to grab the brush tool and pick a color that I like. And I can just manually color this area in. And you notice that it appears to be coloring in the lines because this layer is behind the ink layer. If it were in front of the ink layer, you'd see how messy my lines actually really are. But because they're behind the ink, they're sort of hidden a little bit better. Now you can also use the paint bucket tool, but I want to show you one of the challenges of the paint bucket tool. When I go to use it by default, sometimes it leaves this border, this halo around because it doesn't quite fill in the pixels very well. So before you use the paint bucket tool, you're going to want to come over to the settings over here, the tool options, and change Grow to 2. And once you do that, now when you dump paint, it'll fill in the area regardless of how much it fades on the edge. Because it's a bitmap program, the pixels fade from black to white, so there's gray pixels in here, and that's what creates the halo. By saying Grow equals 2, you're causing the color to flow into that overlap a little bit and cover it up instead of cause that halo effect. Note the difference between the two approaches. When I hide the ink layer, manually painting it colored in the whole area, while using the paint bucket, didn't paint around the lines. And that's why, that's because I have this set right here. Under Reference in the tool settings or tool options for the paint bucket, select regions found from merging all of the layers. This is what allows me to paint color on the color layer while using the ink layer as lines. So that's how I can sort of trick it. If I don't have that set, it wouldn't work. I'd have to paint on the same layer as the lines are, but I like keeping my color on a separate layer. Another option you have, similar to Procreate, is you can choose a foreground color. Like let's choose a yellow instead. And come up here and grab the color from this little menu or picker. And you can just make sure you have that selected. And then you can drag this onto the color here to change it quickly. This approach uses the same settings as the paint bucket method. So if you didn't add Grow to the paint bucket, you'll get the same halo effect on here too. One of the main tools that I consider super wicked awesome in Krita is the right click when you have the brush selected. If you right click, you get a context menu that's pretty phenomenal. You can have a lot of control in here, including picking all your brushes, okay, choosing which tags are shown in this panel. Okay, if you want to change how many brushes are shown up here, you can go under Settings, Configure Krita, and then there's pop-up palette options in here to make some changes to it as well. Other things you can do in here include mirroring the canvas, which is really handy when you're working with a composition. This is the same as pushing M. If I click anywhere off this menu, it'll just disappear without drawing. If I click again, it'll draw. So just click off the menu to make it go away. But if I hit M, mirroring allows me to test my composition. So if I want to see how it looks from both directions, I can see better. If I'm drawing from both directions, I can see if it's balanced or if it's working fundamentally from both directions. Heading back to that right context menu, I can mirror right here. I can also adjust the canvas to fit the whole window if I want. That hides all the tabs. In fact, with this little menu, you probably don't need many of those little dockers. So you can just mostly use this and then jump back out of it when you need to. I can zoom right here. Okay, I can quickly set it to 100%. I can also fit the canvas to the view. In addition, I can hide this menu on the bottom, or I can show this one, which gives me access to the brush settings, to the settings of the current tool. Another option in here that's really handy is the ability to rotate the canvas from right here. And also, this little ring around the color wheel when you're selecting colors represent your recent colors. So if you have a color you've used recently, it's going to be sitting right here. You can very quickly grab it and then paint with it. Right click, grab a new color, paint with it, right click, grab a new color, and you can stick to your palette kind of that way. In addition, you can use the eyedropper tool as well, which is right over here. It's P on the keyboard is the shortcut, or if you want a really quick shortcut when you're using any tool, hold down Control to quickly have access to the eyedropper tool, and you can very fast you can grab a color in here. To delete certain areas of a layer, now I've gone and drawn all these shapes. Let's say I want to get rid of some of the shapes but not all of them. I have to choose a selection tool, and I can select shapes and hit delete, not backspace on the keyboard. Be sure to hit delete to clear it. If I want to select multiple selections, I can hold down shift to add a selection to another selection and then hit delete as well. To deselect, you can just right click and say deselect, or use the shortcut Control Shift A. So what I'm going to do is, I happen to draw both smiley faces on the same layer, and I'm not super psyched about that, so I want them on separate layers actually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead to the color layer, and I'm going to grab a selection tool, and I'm going to erase one character for now, and I'll hit the delete button for color, and I'm also going to go to ink and unlock it and hit delete for that as well. Okay, so now what I have here, if I deselect, what I have here is on the ink layer, I have just the yellow character, and then I actually have the color kind of underneath. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down shift and click on both these layers, okay, or select them both by clicking the check boxes. I'm going to right click and say group layers, or Control G, okay, quick group. And it's going to put them together in a group. And I can name this, for instance, yellow smiley face. And inside of that group, I now have a layer for the ink and a layer for the color. Okay, there's a couple ways to add shading and blending on that I want to demonstrate next. So I'm going to zoom in and pan over to my picture so it's a little bit closer and I can work on that a little more carefully. One method I'm going to use is I'm going to go ahead and take the color, for instance, the color layer, and I'm going to click a new button up here, and that button is Preserve Alpha. Now, let's draw for a second without that on. I'm going to go ahead and grab my brush. I'm going to hold down Control and grab this yellow color, and then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to choose a slightly darker version of it for a shadow, for instance. Okay, so if I want a shadow to come right through my character like this, right? Notice how messy it is. If I put Preserve Alpha on, it will only allow me to paint where something's already painted on this layer. So it will restrict what I can and can't paint, or where I paint. So it's kind of like forcing me to color in the lines. Man, that's awesome. So if I hit Control again, and I come up over here and choose a very, very light color now, almost white, and I choose that up here, or maybe I put it over here, now I kind of have a highlight. Okay, so that's a very easy way to color on the same layer. Another way to do this, I'm going to go ahead and undo, so that's just plain yellow again, is to create separate layers. And what I can do is I can create a new layer in this group for shadow, And let's say I want to be able to change the color later. Maybe instead I'll pick a gray color and I'll draw in here. I can turn this off, for instance. I'll draw in here a gray color. Okay, and then I'll set the blending mode to luminosity. And then I'll also click this button over here, which says inherit alpha. Looks like a little fish. Okay, and that forces this layer to obey the layer below it. It'll only show what's painted if anything's painted below. So if I go back to this layer now and I go ahead and I add some yellow on, you'll see that part of that shadow shows up. It's still there, but it only shows up if there's yellow behind it or something on the layer below it. And then I can, the nice thing about this is the shadow is different. So if I want to change now the color of my character, I can come in here and just drop on an orange color, for instance. Okay, and now the shadow still works because it was gray and it's using luminosity. Okay, so there's a lot of different ways to see this that you'll see on videos online, but this is kind of how I go about it. There are two different ways and approaches depending on what you want to need and what you're doing. And I would do something similar for a highlight. I would create a highlight layer and I would make this like a pure white. And even though I can't see it, it's still hanging off the edges until I hit that little inherit alpha button. Okay, I can adjust the opacity so it's not so white. Okay, and then I have those two, the highlight and the shadow, sort of done differently. As you'll see in other videos, there's lots of ways to blend. I prefer using like a wet brush and turning the opacity down to like 20%. With that wet brush selected, you can just very gently touch the edges and it sort of just starts blending them in immediately. Okay, and then I have to select the highlight layer and blend that one in a little bit too. Okay, another way to do this, let's undo all that, is to grab a blender, actually a blending brush, and sort of just go back and sort of get those edges to blend in together by smudging them like you would paint. Okay, click on the shadow. I can smudge that a little bit. It's almost like just blurring the edge a little bit so it fades in. It's not so sharp. And then when you're done your character, you can just sort of minimize it and start by drawing a different one. So let's see this whole process one time through full. Let's go ahead and create a new layer. And this time we're going to make sure it wants to create it in my smiley face group. So I'm going to bring it outside. I'm going to call this sketch. I'm going to move my canvas over just a little bit. Grab my brush. Get a nice sketch tool this time. I'm going to use the airbrush. See what kind of tip I have on it. Make sure I have a nice color to sketch with. I'll make that a little smaller. That's a good sketch. And then if I take a pen now, right, and sort of search for that shape. Use the eraser mode to kind of clean up. Really look for that shape on the sketch. Okay, so there's my sketch. I'm going to go ahead and create another layer called ink. Okay, and even right now, you can grab them both and group them, right, just so they're a subgroup. And quick group, and I'm going to call this group heart. And on my ink layer, I'm going to go ahead and set the transparency of my sketch layer down to 20%. So it's not so dark. I'm going to grab my ink and I'm going to grab my ink brush that I like and I'm going to put my stabilizer on, or at least my weighted smoother, and I can rotate the canvas if pulling towards me is easier, for instance with a pen. That's why I rotate the canvas a lot, because pulling the pen towards me I can get a much smoother line. That's a little bit too thick for me. Right, then I can hit 5 to straighten it back out. Then I'm going to create a new layer for the color of the heart. And we'll go ahead and grab a nice red color here and grab my paint bucket. Make sure I'm on the color layer, and it's going to use the ink layer as a guide because I have the paint bucket selected, and I have that setting where it's going to use all the layers. Okay. I also have grow set to 2. That way I won't leave that halo there. When I dump the paint bucket in, it does a great job filling it in, and I'm going to make sure the color is behind the ink. Okay, and to shade this one, I'm going to try a different technique with a dry brush this time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a dark red as my foreground color and a regular red as my background color. So what I'll do is just make regular red the background color. Okay, so now when I use the dry brush, for instance, and I go ahead and paint on this color here, you can see it creates this rough, kind of crayon-y looking shading effect. I think that's kind of neat. It's sort of mixing the two colors that I have in the foreground and background, but remember it's coloring out of the lines. So to fix that, we have to put this setting on and then darken it in. And notice it stays in the lines now. And push down lightly with my pen to blend lightly. If it's blending too fast, you can turn opacity down, and that makes the brush act like it's weaker. Okay, if I want to change the highlight color, for instance, I can switch to a lighter red. And we'll switch to almost a pure white. That way, everything's kind of tucked away in here. You have the sketch, color, and the ink. One last trick I found super helpful is while you're driving around the canvas is to hold R. And that brings up a tool that will allow you to select a layer. So sometimes I get really confused with what's layer is what, and I have to go through and do this like a million times. If you just want a layer, you can go ahead and select the color layer by holding R, and it'll grab that layer. You can grab the ink layer. Notice how my layers over here, watch as it changes. It'll find the layer that I clicked on if I'm holding R down. There's the shadow layer, there's the orange layer, that's the highlight layer over here. So I'm going to go ahead and use 2 to bring my canvas back out. We just drew a smiley face and a heart, each with different approaches using sketching, inking, coloring, and blending. So I would like you to find 10 to 20 things of your own, and the purpose of the exercise is not to draw 10 to 20 things. The purpose is to get wicked super comfortable with drawing in Krita. So if that takes 50 things to draw, that's what you should aim for, your own comfort level. That was a lot of information, so if you need to look at it a couple times, I definitely would. I would surely take some notes on anything that you want to try or practice. Okay, so I hope you guys have fun learning how to draw in Krita. Have a great week.